both streams are synced, and off we go. So, as both runners sort of make their way into this first section of the run, unfortunately, it is just a couple minutes of auto-scroller here. It's not exactly the most sort of enjoyable start, but starting out in the flight units here, generally the idea is just to clear out as many of these enemies and as fast as possible. You'll have to forgive me, chat, as my voice is very sort of tired. Now, unfortunately, I'm not entirely certain if there's any audio coming through here. Bear with me here for just a split second, but for those of you who have not seen NieR Automata, this first little opening section is very sort of unique in how the game really doesn't really keep to the same sort of gameplay aspect all throughout the game. This opening section really isn't fully telling of the entirety of the rest of NieR Automata, but it does give a good perspective into what can be done, because coming into this sort of twin stick section here, we transitioned from a very sort of top-down sort of single stick shoot 'em up to now a twin stick shooter in some respects here. And you'll see most of these transitions in the remainder of the game as well. But it sort of shows that the game isn't necessarily afraid to make the player uncomfortable in certain situations. You can see right here the camera transitioning again before the flight units going into another sort of transition between modes. And sort of the scenery changing as well as we sort of approach this factory sort of structure.
Alrighty, and I am back now. I think I did fix it. Thankfully. Myth, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Making sure. Alright, so both runners coming up pretty neck and neck so far in the shoot 'em up section of the prologue. Again, we will have to see what we get on the fidget spinner RNG towards the end here.
So, like many of the other runs that we've seen in this tourney, we transition into some of the 3D aspects of the of NieR Automata. One of the moves that you will notice, however, for most of the combat in this game, despite how simplistic it is, with only a heavy attack and a light attack button, very sort of similar to sort of like a crossover between like Devil May Cry and Bayonetta, but you kind of get the gist between the combat of those two games. But one of the moves that we're going to be using, particularly in the speedrun, is the dash plus a heavy attack directly afterwards. That's going to essentially save a ton of time, because for every tick of damage that that specific input deals about 4.5 to 5 times regular damage for reasons that are quite unknown to us. It's quite uncertain as to why the developers left it in for the full game, but nonetheless it exists.
Yep,
and
definitely love our developer oversights in this speedrun, for sure.
Yes, indeed.
2B, ma'am?
What is
It is funny too, because originally in the demo there was another damage glitch that did get patched out, but now we have the short sword damage glitch, and I think it's just as good, if not better.
Nothing's ever easy.
I believe it might have actually been the other way around. I know for some of the runners who did get a chance to play the demo at the time, but even I believe TechTheist as well has put a good amount of time into the demo recently. Some of the techniques that we know today are still viable in the demo that was released back in early 2017, I'd say. So it's interesting that some of the techniques are very sort of similar. Both runners here, just pointing out for both perspectives, performing the very precise high jump known as bridge skip. Looks like Fullest had a little bit of trouble there. Oof. Going into third try bridge skip. Come on, buddy. There you go.
So far, coming out just slightly ahead at bridge skip, and then as well getting bridge skip on his first attempt. However, having a little issues with the pod launch here. So that'll give Fullest a little bit of a chance to catch up.
Winsuper in an ever so slight lead. Going into Silo 3 here. Again, a lot of these silos is just dealing with the enemies ahead of you. Oh, that was a very nice laser from Fullest. Being able to defeat those stubbies in one fell swoop like that laser that we had seen is very effective. Fullest is going to try for a little bit of swag there, throwing a damage glitch as one of the stubbies falls, and immediately lasering the remaining 4. Unfortunately, he missed one of them, but it looks like he's gaining some time back against Winsuper to close out Silo 3. Not too far behind, only a handful of seconds between these two runners.
And again, both of these runners having a very, very good prologue section so far.
And both runners going for the swag on angles. Let's go.
This is a tournament first. Fullest a little bit more practiced on it. Winsuper looks like he's going to abandon the strat and just go for the normal route.
There should be another facility across.
Winsuper might have thrown his lead there with that little bit of swag. Fullest with the better execution overall.
I guess even they get bad intel from time to time, huh?
Unfortunately, that time can be equalized if Fullest for some reason gets angle RNG and gets punches. Let's just pray for no punches for both of these runners.
Doesn't matter. I'll just take him out.
So we will see Fullest going for the buffless strat. You need to hit Marks 2 with 2 damage glitches as it's on its way over to the final position. For that to work out, you will save a little bit of time in menuing to the buffs. Looks like Winsuper also going for the buffless. Both runners getting the threshold pretty quickly.
Fullest ever so slightly gaining a lead here on Winsuper, but this lead might just cave if Fullest gets punches. Punches is the ever so elusive attack that we, for this first section at least, we do actually want punches. That way we can damage angles to our best ability, sorry. And at least for the second section, we don't want punches because that attack actually occupies a great deal of time in comparison to some of the other attacks from him.
Yep. Currently, it doesn't really matter what you get for your attacks. Even getting the punches here will be a little bit better because you can get the damage out on top of the angles. As soon as it goes into 9S cutscene, though, that is when it does matter, as angles will only do one attack phase before beginning to rip up the bridge that you're standing on. So ideally, you want to get projectiles for the optimal speed. We'll see what Fullest gets here.
This is the target.
He is going to get one of the
Split-second
projectile patterns.
It looked as if Engels was about to choose punches, but then chose a ranged attack there. Both players getting a ranged attack. This is almost a mirror match. Both of these runners getting basically the same RNG out of Engels here.
Now let's get real about it. The true prologue strat is everything comes down to left pipe or right pipe.
Yes.
Actually, what pipe is the better pipe?
Left pipe.
I'm a left pipe boy myself.
Left pipe has to be the best pipe. It's the only pipe.
We saw the pipe master himself, Panpipes, doing a little bit of a tricky game with the pipes in yesterday's run, juking to left pipe and then taking right pipe. I don't know if he's trying to evolve the pipe metagame or not. He would certainly be the man to do it, though.
I don't think you can really change the pipe meta at this point.
That's what you think.
You either choose
So
a side
somebody-
or you never choose a side.
Hacking in.
You can't flip-flop between either side here.
9S.
Alright, so we'll see Fullest now coming up on a little bit of a movement tech here. He's going to do a double lift to skip running around the angles here. Pretty clean execution there. And we'll see Winsuper coming up on the exact same tech.
Winsuper strategically losing or putting his mouse cursor on his screen. I don't know if that's to trigger me or not. Time will tell.
I have to help 9S.
Fullest having a relatively clean ninjas there, and Winsuper not far behind either.
This is a pretty close mirror matchup. If it hadn't been for Winsuper's execution on the angles swag skip, they would definitely be completely neck and neck, but still a very close prologue so far.
I'm not too certain what Fullest was planning to accomplish there by spamming his dash, but unfortunately you can actually
I didn't know the
sort
machines
of
had that kind of intelligence.
make it so that way Engels doesn't exactly give you the right RNG by actually dashing into one of his attacks.
To provide support.
Almost like a perfect evade on the 3D space when on foot, you can actually do a sort of similar perfect dodge in the flight unit.
The control.
Unfortunately, that
The enemy
attack animation can actually slow down Engels to the point where he might choose a different attack. You kind of have to think about those things in terms of slowing down Engels, but it looks like Fullest got a relatively decent RNG
control.
spot there.
Seized from enemy
Not
units.
far behind by Winsuper either.
Only about a 2-second or 3-second gap between these players.
Use its control system.
Affirmative. Infiltrating enemy subunit. Behavior table adjusted. Balance controls overridden. Enemy unit subjugation complete.
Alright, pretty good prologue coming up from Fullest here. About a 1446. 1448. Yeah, that's a very clean prologue.
And a 14:41:51 from Winsuper. Not very far behind. Both very respectable prologues. Now, this is going to be a little bit of an uphill battle for Winsuper. Being a relatively newer runner, Fullest has put a lot of time into this game, and so a lot of these sort of small optimizations that you'll see through the bunker and through the rest of the game, you'll definitely see sort of the differences in that Fullest will have a lot more consistency on some of these smaller tricks. More specifically in this menuing even, where it is surprisingly easy to mess it up in between just poor inputs and doing the wrong button pushes. Looks very clean from Fullest.
Morning.
Yep, unfortunately we see Winsuper getting a little bit of struggles on the voice audio slider. Not quite getting the setting that he wanted, so he's going to start it up. That'll put him back about 2 seconds.
Menu boss is always the hardest boss.
Oh, I hate menu boss.
Fullest opting for a small strategy there. He's actually going to move into 9S for a split second there before he leaves 2B's room. That's going to allow him to do a partner dialogue skip right in front of the transporters there, saving a little bit of time. Looks like Winsuper is going to follow suit.
That means we'll be getting flight units, huh? Better head for the hangar.
Doing that dialogue skip there is rather dicey because sometimes you can go too far into that trigger area and you'll actually cause 2B to just walk right into it, losing the amount of time that you otherwise would have gained. But very marginal.
Interesting thing to note about the cutscenes in this game is usually you'll hit the cutscene trigger and then slow walk sort of towards the point where it would actually trigger the cutscene. A lot of the time we'll see methods like that partner dialogue skip or dash swinging or pod launching into the cutscenes to get rid of that walking phase and just hit the cutscene trigger immediately.
Now, I know Marble Soda was looking out for that strategy on Fullest's screen, but I'm not too sure what exactly he calls it again. I'm kind of curious if Marble Soda can point that out in chat for us.
Bunker to 2B, come in. I've set a landing point for your flight unit.
Winsuper doing a similar strategy of spinning all the way around, trying to defeat all of these flyers in as quick as possible.
Good luck down there.
Ah, that's what it was. Thank you, Marvels.
Alright, so both of these runners not having any issues with the second shmup there. And we will be going into the Ruin City. Just, again, a lot of beeline movement, a lot of optimized sort of movement, and just a couple little movement tricks to get over a couple of the barricades. No combat really here. And we get to do our favorite, probably my favorite part of the run, the drop quest.
None of the machines in this
the elusive fetch quests. Fullest trying for a little bit of a jump reset there on the side of the barricade. Funny story, you can actually dash off of most surfaces and it'll reset the number of jumps that you have, and that's usable on some of the surfaces we'll see in the run, and it's very decent sort of movement tech. We'll see Winsuper try it right now, and he did actually manage to jump very quickly and dash onto that little railing and reset the number of his jumps in order to make it up onto the barricade slightly faster. But again, this is really going to come down to some of the muscle memory between these two runners. Winsuper might not have the greatest confidence into this race, but I do believe in him. I feel like he can perform very well in comparison to Fullest.
Operator 60 to 2B. It is time for your regularly scheduled contact.
This is 2B. Nothing to report.
Good to hear. Say, how's the weather on Earth today? Good?
It's fine. Does that question have
And you can ever so slightly see Winsuper's mouse cursor on his game. Not too sure if it just disappeared there, but
Let's get these back to the trader. Plant life is claimed.
Yeah,
much
a lot
It's
of
always
our
amusing.
runners will play in either windowed full screen or just windowed altogether. And because we have the most keyboard input, sometimes we will end up leaving the mouse cursor over. Unfortunately, it looks like Winsuper did forget to turn off the mouse capture.
oh
in his OBS.
man. Fullest having between a rock and a hard place here between some of these enemies that he's killing there. I think they dodged 5 times out of all the damage glitches that he threw. Very elusive machines when trying to damage glitch them,
The Resistance is a valuable ally to Yorha. By
but
helping them,
the idea behind those enemies is to kill a
I
specific,
don't think they're a pain.
or the specific stubbies and medium bipeds in that group in order to get the items that they need. Fullest losing a little bit of time there as he dash swung past one of the vendors. And you'll notice that Fullest also upgrades his sword there, and Winsuper will also follow suit in that the first upgrade that you get from these quests basically allows the short sword that you have to be equipped for, or to be upgraded for free. And we'll see this now in effect with Fullest changing his movement to be doing a dash plus a heavy attack,
Understood, 042.
so that way he can really take advantage of the faster, or marginally faster, movement speed of the attack.
And again, still a very close race, but we do see Fullest is quite the experienced runner, and so he will just be able to edge out a couple seconds on every little section of the game, just with highly optimized movement. As I say
Fullest
that, highly...
losing one of his lifts there that might have been a dropped input between his jump input. That does actually happen in this game sometimes because the inputs are directly tied to your frame rate. Sometimes when the game drops a couple frames, you can actually lose your inputs that you do, which is very unfortunate. And it looked like Winsuper had a little bit of an issue climbing that barricade as well.
Now we'll see him doing all his buys. Most importantly, out of the buys there would be his buffs and the resilience chip. I mean, they're all pretty important buys. We need every bit of them. But the resilience chip is definitely helpful. We won't be equipping it till later in the run, but when we do eventually equip it, it allows you to be hit as long as your health is above, I think it's 80%. You won't get staggered. You can just continue on with your combat, top yourself up on health pots, allows you to keep your DPS just up there.
Yeah, within the realm of don't get hit, and you'll stay in the state of unstaggerable.
So yeah, Fullest just pulling off barricade skip now. He will opt to stay out of bounds here to do the Desert Discovery clip. It does save about 4 seconds, however, if you're not confident with the skip, it is usually just safer to go inbounds, as voiding out here will make you lose about 4 to 5 seconds, or the amount of time that you would get saved by doing this clip. Again,
However,
Fullest
it is
practiced
worth
this down pretty hard, so he will get it.
It is worth mentioning, though, that along that out of bounds, it is rather tough in terms of how far you can really skirt around this out of bounds, but surprisingly, jumping along some of these areas that you would think are sort of pits along the path does lose a good amount of time in terms of how far and how much you can really be moving in along the path
We've got
as
enemies
directly as
approaching.
possible. So both runners opting to not necessarily take the most optimal pathing for that out of bounds, but that's okay. Here we're just going to divert into the desert for a little bit to pick up an extra pod. That will help with some of our damage later in the run, especially in terms of flight units and as well as slow-mowing ability. When it comes to holding your pod program, you can actually slow down the world a little bit, and that's definitely going to be useful for some of these encounters. Fullest, unfortunately, wasn't able to get Stupid Rock here as the machine burrowed slightly out of sight and slightly out of sync with how Fullest had wanted it. Ideally, you could slide across the side of the rock there, or the rock face, and be able to basically be put right next to the trigger that he needs. Let's see if Winsuper goes for the same trick.
The structures were referred to by names such as apartment complex.
So the annoying part of that trick is really sort of the timing.
Very good Stupid Rock out of Winsuper, actually. The funny thing to note, I remember watching in a race between Canaris and Fullest. Canaris hit a very good Stupid Rock and got himself almost next to the stubby he was chasing, and the stubby actually ended up punching him back. You don't want to do it too good.
That happens.
It doesn't happen too often, but it's hilarious to watch anytime it does.
Fullest cutting through this out of bounds very quickly here. He's going to grab a trigger that he needs in order to spawn in the enemies for the pit, but he's also going to, very lucky there, grab the platform that he needs in order to continue the fight. Fullest is also going to buff up within the menus here and switch his weapon sets so that way he has his short sword on his heavy slot for both weapon sets. That's going to be important for some of these boss fights to come, as we had mentioned earlier, the damage glitch that you can perform in order to deal a massive amount of damage, you can basically double the amount of DPS that you deal by throwing a damage glitch and throwing another damage glitch right afterwards on a different weapon set. Fullest about midway through the dialogue for this pit fight. Winsuper not very far behind. Still very good performance by both runners here. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the fight here, with all these stubbies, we're really just sort of waiting out the dialogue, and killing as many of these stubbies as we can is going to be very beneficial for some of the later fights as well. This is an RPG after all. The higher the level you are, the more damage you deal, etc. Fullest attempting to self-destruct there, but it didn't look like he was going to get off there. He's going to throw a single damage glitch and buff up and make sure that Adam is taunted. And he's going to try for a phase skip here that skips a small little cutscene, basically inundating Adam with a massive amount of damage all in this very short period of time, causing him to transition between phases. Overall, very clean takedown of Adam there by Fullest. Getting hit there, unfortunately getting pushed back a little bit. We'll see how Fullest fares with the rest of Adam's attacks. Not being very nice to Adam either. Still finishing with a very fast time for Adam overall.
Through that hole.
I believe Fullest had mentioned that he was a little bit ahead of PB as well, so we'll see how that fares as he is leaving Desert. Winsuper having a little bit of trouble there on Adam.
It stopped.
But I believe Winsuper might have lost the 10 seconds or so it took for that cutscene to hit. it is a little precise in terms of how you damage Adam in a very small window. You have to be buffed, you have to have him taunted, and you have to be ready for any of his attacks to basically go wherever he chooses. And sometimes it is very inconsistent, but overall still very good performance by both runners here.
Alright, we will see Fullest setting up to perform the Desert Save Scum. Before they clipped out of bounds, both of them did grab the transporter. Here they clip out of bounds and run within range of the transporter to save their game and load it up again.
I'm not quite certain why Fullest just got a level up there, but I guess we'll take it.
Yeah, quite
He must
weird.
be a little confused on his end as well. I've never seen a level up going into that save scum for literally no reason. He was not in combat at all, and I don't know why he leveled up. But he was essentially being able to displace 2B as far as possible into the desert area, so that way he can continue to his next destination in the amusement park. Winsuper trying to get up onto that platform there and not necessarily knowing how far that invisible floor goes out. It looks like he missed it for his first jump. Let's see if he makes it for his second. Unfortunately, it is a little deceiving as to how far it actually is away from his jumping platform that he's on currently. Unfortunately, with an invisible floor in an out-of-bounds area, it's not necessarily that easy to know where some of these things are. And it looks like he's aiming a little too far left there.
Yeah, it could definitely be a really weird clip to hit, just because the floor that you're going for is a bit higher than what you're aiming. It's usually pretty safe to go for it if you do a double pod spin, but for efficiency, a lot of people will just do a double jump and then pod spin once and just do a heavy in the air to plunge and get the height that they need.
So Fullest being able to skip over the discovery cutscene to the amusement park. Fortunately, that cutscene is not required whatsoever, so we're able to basically just circumvent it, and hopefully Fullest will be pulling out a relatively new technique that's been developed known as auto-scroller coaster. Let's see if he goes for it right now. And it looks like he's going to take the safer route of going along the floor here. He is still going to have to pick up some of these triggers along the way, but similar to how the intended path, or rather normal path of this game progresses, climbing up the staircase here and hopping onto the roller coaster. We might see the skip that I had alluded to earlier from Winsuper, but I'm not too certain if they are very familiar with the auto-scroller skip either. We'll have to see in just a minute here. But effectively, Fullest is locked to this roller coaster in having to enjoy the ride and take a little bit of an easy break as these enemies spawn on top of him. Winsuper just making his way into the amusement park area now. Still very good execution of the discovery cutscene skip. Sometimes you can actually try to attempt a double lift on that route, and sometimes actually get thrown into the cutscene because 2B's movement sometimes pushes her a little farther forward than we would have liked. But still, overall, still pretty good.
Let's see how Winsuper handles the Let's Play skip. Shouldn't be too big of an issue for a runner of his caliber. Yep, again, hitting it first try. Oh, and accidentally voiding out of bounds. The floor here can be a little bit tricky sometimes.
What the hell?
And it looks like both runners opted to go for the normal path thing for the roller coaster. Fullest making his way into the Beauvoir fight. He's going to quickly damage down her first phase there, get her as close to the stage as possible, so that way she can transition quickly into her next phase.
It's trying to hack us. If we take hacking damage, it'll affect our bodies as well.
Are we seriously being attacked with dead androids?
And we'll see how Fullest approaches this. A lot of runners will just try and get as much pod fire down as possible and run around light punching these, as they are pretty close to one hits. Fortunately, getting hacked here will lose you about 5 to 6 seconds, depending on how quick you hack.
Oh,
4 to 6,
very close there, Fullest. It looked as if for a split second there he was going to get hacked by the same wave. He has to be very careful not to get hacked there again. Fortunately, narrowly escaping that.
Try to hack it back. Keep it busy. You got it.
And once Beauvoir is down on the ground there, he's able to DPS her down very, very quickly using the dual swords that he is using to damage glitch with, just melting Beauvoir down.
Alert. Saturation attack triggered by enemy consciousness data.
And Winsuper transitioning into the first phase of Beauvoir. Fullest really starting to take a lead here at the end of the Beauvoir fight.
What is it?
And the reason as to why Fullest decided to self-destruct at the very end of the fight, he's setting up for a specific trick that he'll be using to transport very quickly between Pascal's village and the resistance camp. Or rather, in the reverse order as such.
Yep, again, this next phase of the game is a lot of running. You're just grabbing, essentially, it's almost a fetch quest, where you just go back and forth between Pascal's village to the resistance camp and then back to Pascal's village, just delivering items between the two leaders. And we can cut out a big section of that running by using a death warp. We'll see how they set up for it in a second here.
Oof, Winsuper getting hacked there on one of the bodies, losing a little bit of time. And surprisingly, Marble Soda calling out Fullest for his use of not very much swag in this run as a result of not going for auto-scroller coaster skip.
There are a few theories about that, but no one knows for sure. Hard to tell what an alien is thinking, you know?
Laying it on him.
They all have white flags.
Looks like they really
Alright,
don't
so
wanna
we will
fight.
see Fullest picking up the transporter here, getting his save down. When you die in this game, you do end up going back to whatever the last transporter you saved at. I still think you keep quest progress, but you do lose all your plug-in chips. That is the reason why we avoid equipping the resilience chip we bought earlier until after this death warp. We'll see Fullest coming up on the box clip. Oh, very nice. He does get it without the SD.
Operator 60 to 2B.
Now, most runners would opt for finding a boar. It looks like Fullest isn't going to find a boar here. Only a moose looked like it was around, so he's going to have to take the slower moose here in comparison to a hopping boar. We'll see if Winsuper has better luck in a couple minutes or so.
I don't know how I'm supposed to go on living.
I am definitely not the person to discuss this with.
I don't think I can stand spending one more day in this bunker.
You leaving would be bad for me. It would affect mission efficiency.
Alright, so Fullest will now get into the resistance camp here. He'll he'll give his item that he got from Pascal to an enemy, and then pick up the item from her, and go back to the animal, get the animal to kill him, and then he'll death warp back to Pascal where he can finish the quest and then continue on. And you also see when he did get into the resistance camp, he went over to the door in the corner there. Since there is a little bit of dialogue left over from the ride over, we just use the door to cancel out that dialogue so we can talk to an enemy quicker.
Rip Deathless. A deathless NieR Automata run never exists. Capo.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You're making me want to do it in my race now. Give up the death warp just to do a deathless.
I would not suggest purposely dying.
What's that noise?
2B, this is an emergency transmission from the bunker. We're reading a Goliath.
Oh, if Winsuper is lucky here, he might be able to get the boar. Hopefully the moose doesn't get there first. Nice.
And
Looks like Winsuper is going to pick up the boar here.
I knew it.
there we go.
And he's doing the boar hops. This is marginally faster movement than the boar's actual sprint,
Let's get going.
On it.
and is overall pretty swaggy. A lot more swag than we had seen in Fullest's perspective, unfortunately.
Yep, unfortunately Winsuper is a little bit behind on time, so he might not win the race, but he's definitely won the race in our hearts.
Yeah, no.
No, no, no. Winsuper is ahead in swag. Hands down. The boar makes the difference between these two runners here. No matter the outcome, Winsuper has won in swag.
So we'll see if he gets lucky here. Okay, the boar kills him pretty quickly. Good RNG, good boar. We'll see Fullest now coming up on the City Angles clip. There is a pile of rocks as you get to the floor that Angles is on that keeps you in to fight Angles until the fight's over. Fortunately, there is a small window in the invisible wall that is there that when you double jump, you can actually just dash through it and skip the fight altogether.
Oof, and it looked like Fullest had a little bit of issues there positioning to be into the right place, but quickly making a recovery over the wall. Yes, I did say over the wall because the developers totally intended you to go through the wall completely unobstructed.
I mean, why else would they put a window there?
I think of it more as a whole, although that might be a little lewd.
And so we will see him here positioning yourself between Angles' head and shoulder. You can two-shot Angles by buffing up your ranged attacks and then using both your pod programs. The hitboxes being a little bit larger than they look will actually just sponge all of the bullets.
However, his positioning is rather key, because if he positioned himself too close to Angles' laser, he would have actually lost out on a lot of that damage, because the laser just annihilates any sort of damage that of Fullest's that passes right in front of the laser. So he really had to shove the flight unit into his sort of neck area to get the proper amount of damage that he got.
On this planet. If we can destroy them, we can end this long and arduous war.
But it seems to be underground. Like way underground.
Guess we'll see once we get there.
So Fullest making his way onto the negotiation section of this run. Not a particularly hard fight ahead of Fullest. He's always usually consistent with his fights.
Seems like they've been here for a long time.
What is this place?
But overall, we've seen a couple runners struggle on this fight in particular. Between 2B, 9S, and Alan, and Steve.
You.
2B, look out!
My name is Adam.
I don't know what you're talking about, Ethereum. It's Adam and Eve, not Alan and Steve.
No, Alan and Steve is the greatest enemy of all time in this game.
Will wipe out the androids next. Machines are
I don't know of any Eve or Adam.
We can grow. We can become aware. Eventually.
So here, this is a time sequence, so we will just see Fullest try and kill Steve as fast as possible for his free level up, in which he'll go out of bounds in the negotiation area here to go clear out the tunnel. That'll open him up for getting a couple drops if he does decide to go for Virtuous Contract 3, as well as the experience from killing the enemies in the tunnel. We'll also clear it so he can dash swing out.
And also a very good execution in a technique in his combat known as double damage glitch plus slow-mo, where under normal circumstances you're only able to weapon swap when you're not holding your pod program down, and the combat that's required in order to execute that is very sort of unique in that it's very much like a rotation of inputs that the player is always having to cycle through between throwing a damage glitch, stopping and starting their slow-mo, and weapon swapping onto the next weapon set. That enables them to essentially slow down the boss enough so that way the player can get the maximum amount of damage on the enemy as possible while being in a very safe and relative state.
Alright, Winsuper now coming up on the negotiation section, right as Fullest is about to leave. So still a very close race. Again, any type of death or soft lock could even this right out, but with the caliber of runners that both of these two are, I think it's pretty unlikely for it to happen.
We're attempting to deploy them at other points as well.
I'd say unlikely.
Unlikely,
However,
not impossible.
Yes, exactly.
They let you transfer your consciousness to
However, I would not wish it on either of these runners.
Yep, for sure. As much as I want an upset, I will not, I won't commentators curse Fullest out of it here.
Looks like Steve is giving Winsuper a little bit of an issue there in terms of some of his attacks. It's rather difficult because Steve is rather a fast enemy in terms of his attacks. His kicks and punches are very fast, and sometimes you can never really tell which attack he's about to do, but sometimes under the wrong circumstances, it can really get out of hand. Fortunately, Winsuper clearing through that fight relatively quickly. Let's see if he clips out of the arena.
Fullest is hitting the, he did just hit the dialogue skip in the bunker, so he will save a little bit of time there. And he'll be on his way to Pascal's village to do his buys, as well as head off to the commercial complex. Not too sure when Fullest equips his chips, if he does it in Pascal's village or if he does it after 4 robots.
I believe he does it before.
So yeah, we'll definitely get to see what his spoils were from Adam Pitt, what he gets for crit chips.
Yeah, it looks like Winsuper's opting to just take the rest of the fight easy. Getting out of the hands of Alan and Steve is definitely a nice respite for the runners. And being able to escape that arena is definitely a good feeling. Fullest very quickly opting to sell most of his HUD and system chips, and wow. Fullest opting to buy defense buffs. I never would have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself.
It is something that we're seeing come up pretty commonly in this, in the race setting. A lot of these runners going for safer strats than I think they would if they were going for their PBs. Just in an attempt not to have an unfortunate death.
Say, 2B. What?
Now it looks like Fullest is going to opt to equip his plug-in chips a little bit later than we had initially imagined. So we'll see what his chips are in just a minute here.
We don't get to choose our assignments.
Most of the time he's looking to plug in critical up chips so that way it unlocks the capability of dealing a massive amount of damage on a single damage tick.
The records say it was once a facility
The
known
crits
as
are definitely the most satisfying thing to watch and to hear everything about it when you are doing your damage glitch and you get that satisfying glass break sound.
Fortunately, yeah. Although it is worth mentioning that sometimes, depending on how the runner performs earlier in the run, you can sometimes receive 0 attack and offense chips, and it's really sort of up to RNG as to whether or not if you do get those chips.
Alright, we will see what he got here.
So he's going to equip resilience there, and he's having a little bit of difficulty there on some of the menuing, having to manually throw in where resilience is sitting. He's going to have 2 crit plus 0 diamonds, 1 crit plus 0 normal, and I believe another crit plus 1 in there. So a good amount of critical potential on some of Fullest's fights. Winsuper also opting to sell his system chips up to a certain point, as well as pick up some offensive and defensive buffs from the vendor there. We'll see what chips Winsuper has in a minute as well, but quickly he's going to skip over a sort of cutscene from one of the side quests when leaving the village there. Very nice execution there. Otherwise, if he had hit that trigger, it would have cost him about 4 seconds or so. So very minor, but also very precise in terms of the high jump and long jump required to get over that entire trigger. It is a lot larger than it seems.
And as we see on Fullest screen, a lot of the rocks here in the forest kind of set up awkwardly. Unfortunately, Fullest missing the top of the bridge, so he will have to do a little bit of aerial tech to get out of it, losing a little bit of time. But as I was saying, the forest has a lot of uneven ground, so normal dash swinging isn't something that can happen very easily, so ideal movement, you want to try and get as many dash swings as possible in there.
Overall, very fast movement here from Fullest, scaling the gap between the mainland and the castle there in a very precise long jump. Very clean by Fullest there. Let's see how quickly he can clear out A2 with that kind of movement here going into the rest of the castle. Surprisingly, one of my more favorite skips in this game is clearing this castle in a couple easy high jumps. Despite how complex the entire castle looks from a casual perspective, it is very easy to execute and very easy to scale as well.
And just to note, Winsuper getting 2 crit plus 0 chips, and that was it from his Atom Pit.
Oof.
So
it's definitely going to be an uphill battle for Winsuper, but definitely not entirely the hardest either, because at least having critical chips unlocks the ability to critical hit, although having more critical chips is definitely better. And we'll see this probably on Fullest's A2 fight, where you can really sort of see the amount of damage that we're able to deal in a very short period of time with some of these crits is going to be crucial.
And anything can happen in this run for sure. Like the world record, for instance, was a 0 crit chip run. I mean, Canaris is just sort of a nutter anyways, but just goes to show you don't need the crit chips to set the world record if you perform well in the rest of the game.
However, it is worth mentioning that the world record does get a lot of things correct.
Oh yeah, he's
not necessarily free.
Alright, so we will see Winsuper opting for the alternative strategy to what we saw Fullest doing. He's doing a
Still
skip called
very
Mario Kart.
swaggy there. So very swaggy there by Winsuper, opting to basically use the geometry of the hill and self-destructing along its path, so that way he can convince the game into thinking that he was initially in the castle itself, and it replaces him on the drawbridge. The reason why that was a little bit swaggy is that you don't actually need to be in that corner directly in order to get the drowned warp trigger. You can actually aim a little bit to the right of that corner on his plunge and still be able to get that drowned warp that Winsuper got. So very lucky and very swaggy as well.
Now, as Winsuper approaches the A2 fight here, we'll see Fullest setting up for the Flooded City skip. A quick little two-part skip. One is a plunge into the cutscene trigger, and another is a plunge into the drown zone at Flooded City to teleport you down there, saving all your running. However, we should focus. Let's see how Winsuper does on this A2 fight.
A lot of things can actually go very wrong in terms of the A2 fight, because a lot of A2's attacks are very fast and very quick, and the window for which the player has to damage her is very, very small. Keeping her taunted and keeping her under constant stagger is going to be crucial there. Winsuper definitely making a good fight out of A2. Fullest being able to scale through the entirety of Flooded City in a couple of plunges, hitting all the triggers that he needs in order to progress for this particular area.
Very quick, clean kill on that fidget spinner as well. It can definitely be one of the more annoying enemies down here, as it will, it can either choose to fly away from you or fly above the height that your damage glitches can hit.
I always have trouble with that fidget spinner because sometimes it doesn't always want to cooperate. Sometimes it just wants to stand still, sometimes it moves all over the place. So sometimes it's very sort of convenient for runners to dispatch it very quickly and effectively as well. However, Fullest making his way into the Resident Sleeper section of the run. Be sure to sleeping accommodate to your very will, as Winsuper follows suit, not very far behind, but definitely about a half section behind Fullest.
Yeah, again, still very close. In the last two races that we've witnessed in this tournament, one player has soft blocked on Copied City on the mansplaining skip, so hopefully we don't see, 3 in a row.
Although it is said that things happen in threes. So,
yes.
I'm not saying anything, but I'm also crossing my fingers that both runners are not plagued.
Curse.
That might be commentator's curse. I might be causing some issues there. Winsuper performing the Flooded City version 2 skip that we had seen with Fullest there. He's going to grab the trigger that's underneath the building there and then warp all the way back up to the resistance camp. That allows him to get another angle to plunge off of and hit one of these drown areas that replaces him into the Flooded City area, as if the game thought he was actually in the Flooded City area itself.
So let's
But overall,
see how he deals with the fidget spinner here.
I know it can definitely give some runners a bit of a hard time. Overall, very fast kill. Being able to taunt the fidget spinner there is always a difficult task for some runners, including myself. I definitely struggle with that fight overall. Fullest making his way into the Goliath Flyer fight, but not very much to comment on the next 10 minutes or so between these two runners. Green is unfortunately one of these sections in the game where, because we're tied to strictly being in the flight unit for a majority of the section, we're not really able to do very much in terms of skips or out of bounds. It's really just sort of chug on through the auto-scroller.
Wait, I'm still picking up a large enemy presence.
I'm looking to buy Grunt Skip.
What on?
$2,000.
If it's that big, we should be able to see it.
I hope something like that is possible, but I do have my doubts.
I'm definitely very skeptical of the Grunt Skip myself as well. We've highlighted it in a couple of talks about searching for a solution to it, and there's just, it's such a large section of the game. There's so many separate like game triggers.
It's a very sort of unique sort of section that has a lot of triggers very intertwined with one another, and at least from our perspective is very difficult to skip.
The other thing is, with a lot of the skip in a run, we do abuse going out of bounds or using some sort of mechanic in game. Because this is an entire section of the game where you are in the flight suit, it is hard because you are just locked into that plane of the shmup.
It is actually kind of funny sometimes when, just thinking of planes, because at least in some of these waves, you can notice that some runners do melee attacks into some of these waves as the enemies spawn in from basically the sky or above the player. And sometimes you can actually melee attack in such a way that catches the enemy, so that way as they're falling, you hit them on a different sort of elevation than the player is actually on, sometimes causing a little bit of a weird interaction. But this section definitely has its weird quirks, like enemies not really spawning, your teammate despawning. Anything can really happen in this section, and in the rest of the game as well. Very weird stuff has happened. But hopefully these runners, both having very good luck on either of their parts. I'm not too certain if we've seen it in this tournament, but we have seen it in a good number of runs where our partner just decides to essentially disappear. And for whatever reason, when that happens, it sometimes doesn't cause the enemy waves to properly interact with the player in a way that the partner who has disappeared is basically omnipotent, where their attacks hit everywhere on the screen, and unfortunately it doesn't happen every time, but there is a % chance that it does happen. It's rather rare for it to happen, but it's always a marvel to see when it actually does occur. None of us have an idea as to why it happens, it just happens.
Are you Yorha?
Hunter Squadron deploying out of North 12C Defense HQ.
Easily the cheesiest line in the game.
Officer 4B.
Are you Yorha?
We'll take it from here.
Oh my.
2B, let's leave this area to the reinforcements. I have an idea. You and I should.
That's actually a good question. How much does your partner affect the run? In some respects, it actually does affect quite drastically. In the fight that we had seen before from both of these runners in the Goliath Flyer, just before the main Groon section, if your partner is on the wrong or on a different sort of behavior, like passive versus aggressive, there is a chance that, at least on aggressive, that they can steal your kills a lot of the time, where in many cases we want the XP for ourselves, because when 9S kills, or our partner kills a target, they steal the XP from the player, which is sort of a little backwards, at least nowadays, but it does actually make a difference in terms of some of these fights. It is more noticeable on some of the higher difficulties where, I know at least personally, on very hard, where it makes a pretty drastic difference in some of the fights, where the AI of the enemy and the AI of your partner really sort of, in a way, complement each other, where one takes the aggro off of the player and allows the player to actually damage the boss or the enemy in relatively quick succession. But at least for the purposes of normal mode, it's not exactly the greatest thing to be using him on aggressive passive. We definitely want the damage from him or from our partner, and we also want him to not be all that much of a nuisance. So one of the options we actually use is, as Litz has pointed out, is long range. Surprisingly, when the player is pod firing, the player is still dealing damage, but isn't actually slowing down the boss in any sort of way. So, in some fights, like in Atom Pit, where in certain circumstances where your partner might be damaging Adam, but you actually want Adam to be transitioning to the next phase, sometimes having your partner on aggressive or on passive might not be the best idea. So at least having our partner actively shooting on long range can actually be a pretty big help. I know that was really long-winded, but in many cases, keeping him on something like long range at least helps the player in between some of these boss fights.
Honestly, if there was ever a time to be long-winded, it would definitely be during the run. Since we're not losing much time here anyways.
Yeah. Fullest defeating the second core there, making his way to the third generator core for Grun. Now, it might not look very far, or at least the difference between each of these runners might not look particularly far. One is only a couple sections behind. However, the length of this auto-scroller really gets drawn out in this. You can really see how long some of this takes. And for many players, I know at least for myself, I've definitely lost my temper for Grun in just having the fight take so bloody long.
It is a nice little break, though, if you are in a really tense race, to just kind of relax, get your sleeping accommodations.
Or not relax on the higher difficulties.
Okay, very true. You are a very hard runner, so can understand how you would definitely not like this section of the game.
Although there is some respite still to be had in this section, because it's not necessarily as stressful as other sections of the game. However, for normal mode and any of the lower difficulties, it really is sort of a drag. Although for the higher difficulties, because the way that enemies scale in the higher difficulties, it really makes this section one of the more sort of scary sections.
Alright, we will see Fullest now leaving Grun. It's going to be a little bit more exciting now. We got a lot of skips coming up here that require decent amounts of precision. So we will see Fullest here going out into the ocean a little bit to hit a drown zone a little bit further away, saving him a little bit of time maneuvering through the flooded city. He'll hit another one coming up here to get him a little bit closer to the mouth of the tunnel. There we go. And so now he will be coming up on Copied City Clip. One of the most precise skips in the game, especially if you do decide to upgrade your short sword to Virtuous Contract 3. The skip does become very pixel precise. Fortunately, we have a lot of different setups that players will use to get this clip.
I believe Fullest is a strong advocate of the keyboard and mouse setup that is sort of unique to the PC version of this. It doesn't actually change the clip in any sort of way, but it changes the method as to how the player achieves the clip. Because at least when using WSAND, you're able to strictly and very precisely coordinate a direct forwards movement into the corner. And you can definitely take advantage of that on some of these more precise clips. Some very swaggy pod launch into the trigger there by Fullest.
I'm definitely an advocate for the mouse and keyboard method when it comes to the Copied City and mansplaining clips. I find it just having that true north consistency helps greatly with getting the skips lined up quickly.
It certainly helps, but sometimes it is a little bit clumsy between changing between keyboard inputs and grabbing your controller and trying to move forward quickly. At least personally, I still use the visual lineup for it, but I do use a controller for it. Many other runners have different methods of their own to do the same clips, but overall it's the same general idea.
This is the clip we were talking about, that in the last 2 races we've watched, somebody has soft locked on this clip. Ideally, we're trying to skip Adam's last dialogue here. If you do go into this elevator to skip the dialogue and you get trapped in the elevator, the entire Copied City will unload, and then before you get to the top of the elevator, it will spawn you back to the Adam fight, in which there will be no floor and the entire map will be unloaded.
That's definitely happened to me in a race between me and Fullest, like a good number of months ago at this point, and it's definitely a very disheartening feeling for it to happen. And as we had alluded to earlier, a good, I believe, 2 runs this tournament has died to that exact soft lock.
Yep, the last 2 runs. One yesterday by Froome McGruppen. He was 3 minutes ahead of his PB when he hit the soft lock. And then apparently Questica this morning as well. Thankfully, Fullest not having issues.
Trying to go for a very clean Adam here. It looked like at the very beginning of his combat he had cancelled some of his damage glitches in an attempt to taunt Adam. That was a very nice Copied City clip by Winsuper. Unfortunately, because we clip out so quickly sometimes on Copied City there, sometimes it actually does take the elevator to spawn in, at least for a couple seconds. Fullest very quickly there, being able to skip some of the dialogue from Commander after talking to an enemy there. He was able to talk to one of the NPCs very quickly, hop over to another one of the vendors, and it didn't look like he picked up skill salves. Fullest doesn't necessarily pick up skill salves very often, but at least for A ending, I don't think he opts to buy them for the final fight. That'll be a little bit of a DPS loss if he's not using his lasers properly. However, most runners feel that it's not necessarily required, so to each their own.
Now, I did miss Winsuper's Copied City clip, but I'm assuming it went pretty smooth as he isn't still doing it and he's already moved on to mansplaining.
That's what they want. Why don't they move in?
From how I saw it, it was a very clean Copied City, and
good mansplaining as well.
I'm not too certain if Winsuper is going to lose a little bit of time there. It did take him a couple attempts on mansplaining itself, but he shouldn't have lost a couple seconds or so. crossing my fingers here.
Target location data obtained.
As Fullest makes his way to the factory, meeting up with Pascal to deal with the deep factory section of the run, opting for a little bit of swag there, and also for a strategy known as the Pantsu strat, where 2B's sort of pushing the camera away movement is a little bit faster than her slow walk movement. It's marginally faster and somewhat redeeming of Fullest's lack of swag in this run. However, he is not out of the doghouse just yet.
Unfortunately, Winsuper not soft locking uncopied cities, so that'll break the chain of 3 that we were expecting. So far,
Although
having a pretty
he
clean
was
Adam
getting
fight.
pretty close to low health there on this first threshold of Adam.
That he was.
Sometimes Adam can really sort of successfully hit you a good number of times and cause you to, unfortunately... We'll see here how Winsuper plays on this second phase of Adam. He really needs to be careful on his HP against some of Adam's attacks, but overall a pretty good fight.
Yep, thankfully he was running the defensive buffs the second time around after getting smacked down to that low HP. Definitely not wanting to take a death there. Dying at Adam 2 is it's a pretty significant time loss, as you have to run all the way back from Flooded City.
Oh, that was a very daring dash into that computer girl there up against the side. Canceling Commander's dialogue could sometimes be a little dicey, as the trigger for it is very sort of precise in this sort of spherical shape around an enemy herself. But overall, pretty good execution. Still reading the mail and making his way to the factory itself. Fullest now entering the room known as Mook's room. He's most likely going to opt to clip out of this room. I'm not too certain if he's really willing to kill all of these enemies in here. My suspicion exactly. So he's going to go into this corner with all of these pipes and manage to pod launch through this tiny little hole in between some of the walls. And yes, basically walls are a suggestion in this if you haven't already seen some of the out of bounds in this game. And we're really going to take advantage of that in the Deep Factory, because a lot of these pipes and silos can really be exploited to our advantage. So now that Fullest is in the elevator, he's going to come down to meet 9S here, but he's not going to go along the normal path. He's going to try to clip out of this first room here and basically reach the bottom point of the map. That allows him to respawn the elevator, so that way he can take the elevator back up into the room he just came from. Now, the reason why we're going to be doing that is because we really want one of the required triggers that's about midway through the Deep Factory run. So conveniently, this pipe here has an invisible wall that Fullest can clip through, and almost directly below you at this point, you can plunge down and get to that particular area of the Deep Factory and hit that required trigger. And using some of the warping mechanics in the game, you normally wouldn't be able to warp up that high of a distance, but because the game actually thinks that you're falling forever, even though you aren't, you can actually use that to fall a specific amount of time, so that way you can get replaced back up in that top room. And as you saw, Fullest is now at the very end of the Deep Factory, closing it out, as essentially Winsuper is entering the Deep Factory as well. Very sort of similar scenes with Pascal in the elevators.
Now, interesting thing to note here as well, after those Deep Factory skips, I think there's only one more place, and it's this bridge that you can soft lock at if you, for some reason, manage to get over top of it. But that's, once we're past this fight, it does take away the possibility of a soft lock, and the only thing that will really even this race out would be a death to any of the bosses towards the end.
Oh, now what?
Large energy supply detected within this factory. Proposal. Energy source.
Now, I'm not too certain if Winsuper is going to clip out of Mook's room. He may opt to kill them, but it looks like he's going to... Yeah, he's opting to clip out of this room. This effectively resets these machines' positions, so that way, for whatever reason, it actually manages to progress the this little section here with killing all the machines in this room. We're still unsure on how exactly that clip interacts with how the machines sort of cause the section to progress, but overall, very convenient for us as speedrunners.
And we will see Fullest just completely shredding down this Soshi fight. Ideally, you want to avoid taking out a leg here, as Soshi will fall down and then take a while to get back up before you can make him hit the damage threshold. Fullest having a very, very clean Soshi fight.
Although we did see for a moment there that Fullest's timer had turned red, so it looked like he was behind whatever pace that he's holding right now. I believe he might be comparing against his PB. He had mentioned that he was ahead earlier in the run.
Alright, we will see Winsuper lining up for the second and third parts of Deep Factory skip. Let's see if he can hit the trigger and get the warp back up here. Right,
nice, good warp. He also got the trigger there. Now, if he is able to stay in the out of bounds area through this plunge here, that's very nice. Good setup.
All right,
right down to the
possibility
end.
Of soft locks. Perfect.
However, the opportunity to die is still up.
Definitely ever present, and especially towards the end of the game here, a lot of the bosses, when taunted, will come very close. With defensive buffs, I think it is a 3-shot, so it does give you some time, but with some of the attack patterns, they can rack that damage up very, very quickly. Fullest just a little bit behind his PB from what it looks like. I'd say probably about 4 seconds.
Let's see if Fullest can pull it out in these next couple fights. Losing a little bit of time getting hung up on the fence there isn't exactly what he's wanting. Plunging quickly down those steps for a little bit of extra swag.
What about you?
Winsuper looking like he's getting a little lost there on that vertical bridge. He's on the other side of that railing and a little dicey positioning while he waits for Soshi to lose his force field. That trigger in the Soshi fight is strictly from the music.
Let's move.
It is purely on the time or on an internal timer. So we're really just waiting for the fight to begin. Runners often hop up onto that top little bridge that Winsuper's on right now, just to sort of hang out.
Yep, give your hands a nice little break. Alright, we'll see how Winsuper approaches this fight. Ideally, you just want to double damage glitch down as quick as possible.
But it looks like Soshi's backing him into a corner there. He might go for another attack. I believe Fullest had only one attack out of Soshi.
Unfortunately, he did get the tail attack pattern, one of the a little bit harder to deal with, but not the end of the world. Relatively clean fight coming up from Winsuper.
Fullest had a little bit of difficulty there trying to pass the first set of enemies in the Burning Resistance camp. However, still going pretty strong in this fight. Nothing has really spawned behind him yet, though. He does have to be careful when he's taking out these stubbies because they can sort of stack up on one another and not really die as fast as he wants to. Still being relatively quick here and dealing with this final machine at the end of the alleyway.
Alright, and I will have an eye on Winsuper's timer here. We'll see if he is truly ahead of PB or not. He's been pretty close behind PB throughout this race. I think at a certain point he was behind by 30 seconds. Now he's down to 5 seconds. So we'll see if that clean deep factory skip made up the time for him or not.
Full is coming to a relatively dicey fight here with Bokushi. Mostly because of the electricity. He got knocked back there because it looked like he healed a little bit later than he had wanted to. Getting knocked back not exactly when he wanted to precisely, but still getting good RNG on when Bokushi goes into his death throes and getting off a self-destruct at the perfect time so that way he can get secure a little bit of extra XP for the coming fights and making his way into Core 1.
And it is confirmed now that Winsuper is ahead of PB on this run currently. I'm not too sure how far ahead, but his personal best, I think, is a 132. At least that was the time he has logged so far in his first match of the tournament. Fullest getting out a pretty clean Core 1. We'll see if he can keep it up for the rest of the bosses. Ideally, we'll want to look out for the zero cycle on Core 2.
Can you hear me? Our village is under...
We'll have to see. I'm not too certain what level Fullest is right now. That looks to be either level 19 or level 18.
He is level 19.
He is level 19. Fullest opting to go for an older strategy here along the overpass, taking a little bit of a detour up here. Does lose a little bit of time, but he makes up that time in that good plunge down at the very end of that overpass. Not really making up much time, but still pretty swaggy.
Damn it! They're here.
Or rather old school, I guess you should say.
Unfortunately, I think we still have Fullest run rated at a negative swag because he skipped auto scroller coaster.
Let's take these guys out first.
Winsuper is definitely winning in terms of the swag count this run. This is a very nice core 2 in terms of Fullest's ability there. Being able to not have the core sort of sporadically move around and then suddenly break is very nice and relatively fast overall.
Now, unfortunately, because of skipping the Mook's Room clip, Fullest will not be level 20 going into Eve. It'll be a slight little bit less than
he's not very far behind his comparison either, though. At least about 20 to 30 seconds there on his timer. This is really where Fullest is going to have to stretch his muscles and his slow-mo abilities, because sometimes his crits can't always carry the damage that he deals, but overall still making a good Phase 1 fight, skipping the platforms section, and it looks like he's going to go for the Phase 2 skip. So the idea behind this one is so that way he slows down Eve's ability to self-heal in this section, allowing the dialogue to pass to a certain point, and so long as Eve remains at not full HP for the duration of that dialogue, he skips the section successfully.
Winsuper getting a
right
pretty clean Bokushi as well. Not quite getting the instant vacuum on the Bokushi that you would ideally want, but overall very clean Bokushi. Lining up Core 1 now to the hill.
Oh, that's a very dicey lift for
spot. Wow.
If Fullest hadn't buffed up with his defense buffs there, he really would have been in a difficult position in terms of how he could have recovered from that, but it looks like he's going to make up some of that damage in terms of this melee attack string that he's doing, landing a lot of these heavy attacks and plunges onto Eve is definitely going to make up for a good amount of damage. Pod launching here, so that way he can cancel some of Eve's attacks, just laying it on him. This is overall a pretty good damage section for Fullest here. And
I think actually looking at Winsuper, he is on pace for a sub Definitely a sub 132 time, maybe even a sub 131, depending on how Eve goes for him.
Definitely very close and very quick by both runners here. Fullest potentially getting or having the possibility of getting a sub 129.
Alright, Eve being pretty kind to Fullest in his RNG, staying relatively close. Not quite the instant cutscene drop, but so far...
Still very good. Final time for Fullest should be about 128.25 or so.
I can always reload my backup.
Yeah, so definitely a very clean run.
The you that exists at this very moment.
Winsuper not very far behind on 127.50, almost on his Adam fight. Not Adam fight, Eve fight. We'll see how Eve treats Winsuper here. Fullest finishing with a 128.19.
Please, Tubi. I want you to do this for me.
So just transitioning very quickly here over to Winsuper's audio. Looks like he got grabbed by Eve there right at the very beginning. It's going to be a little dicey for Winsuper's damage cycles as a result here. Very real possibility for Winsuper to get platforms by Eve. Eve choosing a different attack option than he wanted, but that's still pretty good. He made it through the damage threshold. And it looks like Eve's going to be transferring into phase 2 there. Very nice. Not getting platforms is a huge time save.
Another thing to note, Winsuper coming into this tournament, we had him seated at a PB of 134. In his first match, he managed to finish at a 132.22. Definitely on pace to beat that time.
Winsuper definitely taking advantage of all the damage he can possibly put towards Eve here. Going into phase 3, it's going to be a little bit dicey for him. I know he might have a little bit of difficulty here in terms of some of these melee attacks. Having Eve definitely make his, or rather cause a huge problem for a runner is definitely just backing away from the player. And sometimes, it looks like Winsuper is a little bit dicey there, not having his buffs equipped. Still pulling it out pretty well, landing a good number of melee attacks there. Definitely is going to make up from some of that lost damage, although he does need to maintain that taunt on Eve in order to maximize the amount of damage he can output to him. Still relatively of a fast phase 3.
Alright, going into the final phase now. Definitely on pace. We'll see. It'll be pretty tight for 131, but definitely a sub 132 here and a PB for Winsuper, assuming he doesn't kick the bucket and die here. I don't want to curse him, though.
Why would you say that, Six?
I know, I'm sorry.
You horrible person.
I believe in you, Win.
Still a very quick phase 4 out of Winsuper. They're very nice, closing out with about a 131. I'd say about 19 or 15 time there.
Yeah, so beating PB by a minute, that's pretty impressive in a race setting for sure, especially at that level of time.
So we might have time for maybe a post
Yep, we definitely have time.
run. Winsuper with a 131.18 finish. Very strong finish for both runners. I'm not too certain on how the overall audio is, but
We do have Fullest in the lobby now. How's it going, Fullest?
Hi.
Winsuper
Hey.
is joining as well too. Congratulations on the PB win.
Yo, congrats
Congrats.
on the PV, dude.
Massive PB.
I am so confused. I don't understand how that PB is. Because the start of that run was not nice.
I told you, you're clean, man. You got the practice down that you needed to, and you pulled it out when you needed to.
Yeah, I'm glad that I practiced factory just before, because I think that's what made it work, was getting deep factory skip properly.
Yeah, you did have a pretty clean deep factory skip when it came down to it. Not very many issues with the railing, and pretty much first attempt on everything.
Yeah, I somehow got first round on S room. I had a little bit of trouble with the clip outs in the mooks room at the before the plunge, but other than that, like,
Alright, and Fullest, how did you feel about your run?
It shouldn't have been this close. It really shouldn't have.
Wow.
This, oh man. So, I actually golded on a couple of things too, which really surprised me considering how I haven't really been running this game too much recently. So, I don't deserve any of the time save I got. And
It is worth
last
mentioning that Fullest is the master of the derust PV.
I feel like I PV more often when I'm derusting than not, so yeah, that's pretty accurate. The last split, I was 10 seconds behind entering Eve Phase 3, and I had 20 seconds to save on that split, but I ended up losing 8 seconds. So, a bit of a shame there, but otherwise, you know, the run was pretty good, I guess. I don't know. Did you guys have fun?
I think we
I had a lot
did.
of fun.
Unfortunately, we were a little bit disappointed by Fullest's overall lack of swag in his run.
Oh,
I'm
please!
Winsuper definitely taking the
I'm
lead in the amount
sorry
of swag.
for bring up angle swag, by the way.
I went for angle swag. Isn't that enough for you people?
Nah.
Unfortunately, from the vote we had in chat, unfortunately, the boar was the deciding factor for Winsuper
Oh
to
my
take the
God.
lead in the
I
amount
didn't
of
even
swag.
see the boar.
Well, I got the small ball, so
Yeah, that's
Small
the
boar
best
is
boar.
best boar.
Yeah. Hey, for what it's worth, if I had seen a small boar, I would have gone for it. But I saw the two Nice, and I just had to. I had to pick one. No.
I got the ball origin.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, I think, unless you guys have anything else to say about the runs, I think we're pretty close to done here.
Yeah, I've got nothing. Congrats, Winsuper. You deserve that PB.
Yeah,
Get
100%.
sub 130 soon, yeah?
Yeah,
I think you can do it. You can do it.
Get that
You can
top 10.
definitely do it.
Yeah, that time now puts you at 12th on the leaderboard.
So many times. I don't know if I actually changed. I think, unless someone has a unsubmitted, I think I was already at 12 with the 132.03 that I had a bit ago.
Yep.
So 45-second PB doesn't actually change my position on the leaderboard, interestingly. It's just that big gap between me and Aspire and Cersei.
Alrighty, well, I guess we'll just do the thank yous. Thanks to everyone again at Speed Gaming for keeping everything smooth even through the technical difficulties, and thanks to everybody from the NieR community for organizing this tournament. If you're ever interested in running this game, we do have a Discord with a bunch of resources to help you learn the run. The URL for that would be discord.nierspeedrun.com.
But thank you to the runners, and thank you to Six for being here with me.
Yep, likewise, Ethereum. Always grabbing the morning slots with me. Team Canada for the win.
Canada boys. And again, thank you to Speed Gaming for allowing us to host this tournament on their channels. And I believe that's everything. Check out the links for the entire schedule for this tournament. We're going to be here for a good couple weeks to come with a good number of matches.
Alrighty, have a good evening or morning wherever you guys are from.
Take care, everybody.